The night air outside the mansion carried the soft crash of waves against the Malibu cliffs. Inside the house, silence ruled the marble hallway. Well, silence for about 3 seconds. Then, "Don't touch me." Althea's voice snapped through the living room like glass breaking. Ronan froze where he stood. His hand, which had been reaching toward her arm, stopped halfway in the air. "You've been watching me this whole time, haven't you?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Not weak, no, more like wounded pride fighting to stay strong. Ronan swallowed slowly. "Althea, just no." She stepped back from him quickly. Too quickly. The heel of her shoe scraped sharply across the marble floor. Her breathing was uneven now. Short, quick, like she was trying to control a storm building inside her chest. "You don't get to say my name like that," she said, shaking her head. Her eyes were burning, not just angry, humiliated. "You don't get to pretend you didn't just lie to me for weeks." Ronan stood there quietly. No cane, no dark glasses, no careful act anymore. Just a man caught in a truth he could no longer hide. Althea let out a small, disbelieving laugh. Not the happy kind. The kind people make when something finally makes sense. And it hurts. "Oh my God." She dragged a hand across her forehead. Wow." Her voice dropped lower. "You're not blind." The words hung in the air. Heavy. Sharp. Ronan inhaled slowly. "Well, you're not blind." She repeated it again, softer this time. But somehow it sounded even more painful. Her eyes moved slowly over his face, studying him, searching for something. Anything that might prove she was wrong. But there was nothing. No hesitation in his eyes. No confusion. No lost focus. He was looking straight at her. Straight into her eyes. Althea's lips parted slightly. For a moment she said nothing. Then suddenly, "You watched me." Her voice barely came out above a whisper. But the accusation hit harder than shouting. Ronan closed his eyes briefly. "Althea, you watched me." Now her voice was rising again, shaking. "You stood in this house, day after day, letting me guide you around like you couldn't see anything." She took a step closer to him, her hands trembling now. "And all that time you were just standing there, looking at me." Ronan's chest tightened. "That's not how it... Oh, really?" She laughed again, short, sharp. "Because I remember something now." Her eyes glistened. And that hurt him more than her anger. "You remember the night you came home early?" Ronan didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't say a word. Althea nodded slowly. "Yeah." Her voice cracked slightly. "I remember it too." The room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls were leaning in. "I was in my room." Her words slowed, careful, deliberate, and my door was open, just a little. Ronan felt his stomach tighten. Althea looked down briefly, then back up, and I thought I heard footsteps, a pause, a long one. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "But I told myself," her voice softened, "that you couldn't see anything anyway." Ronan's hands slowly curled into fists at his sides. "Althea, listen. You saw me." The words came out barely above a breath. She shook her head slowly. "Oh my God." Her voice cracked again. "You saw me undressing." The sentence fell into the room like something fragile breaking. Ronan opened his mouth, closed it again. For the first time since the confrontation began, he didn't know what to say. Althea wrapped her arms around herself, not dramatically, just instinctively, like she suddenly felt exposed all over again. "You just stood there, didn't you?" Her voice trembled. "Watching?" "No," Ronan said quickly. "I didn't. Don't." Her hand lifted slightly, stopping him. "Don't lie again." Silence followed, the kind of silence that makes breathing sound loud. Finally, Ronan spoke again, quietly. "I didn't stay." She laughed bitterly. "Oh. That makes it better?" "No." His voice was steady, low, honest. "It doesn't." Althea stared at him, her eyes shining now. You let me believe you were vulnerable. The words came slower now, heavier. You let me believe you needed help. Her voice softened slightly. And I felt sorry for you. She shook her head. God. Another breath. You let me guide you through this house. You let me hold your arm. You let me... Her voice stopped suddenly, like she didn't want to finish the thought. Ronan stepped forward carefully. Althea, don't. She stepped back instantly. Don't come closer. Her voice was shaking now. You don't get to stand there and act like you didn't just humiliate me. Ronan's chest rose slowly with a long breath. I never wanted to humiliate you. Well, you did. The words came fast, sharp. You made me feel stupid. Her voice cracked. You made me feel like I was some woman you had to test. Ronan looked down briefly. Because she wasn't wrong. You thought I was after your money, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a conclusion. Ronan didn't answer. And that silence told her everything. Althea nodded slowly. Wow. Another quiet laugh. Yeah, that sounds about right. She turned away from him slightly, wiping her face quickly, not wanting him to see the tears forming there. Well, congratulations. Her voice was quieter now, more tired than angry. You got your answer. Ronan took a careful step closer. Althea, please. She turned back around suddenly, her eyes blazing again. No. Her voice shook. You don't get to explain now. A pause. Her chest rose and fell with a long breath. You stood there watching me. Another pause. And the worst part? Her voice softened painfully. I trusted you. Silence filled the room again. Heavy, uncomfortable. Ronan looked at her like he was about to say something, but the words stayed trapped in his chest. And Althea. Althea looked at him like she was trying to decide whether the man standing in front of her was a stranger, or something worse. The living room fell into a heavy silence, not the peaceful kind. No, the kind that presses against your ears. Althea stood near the center of the room, arms folded tightly across her chest like she was holding herself together. Ronan remained a few steps away. Neither of them moved. Outside, the sound of waves hitting the rocks below the cliff drifted faintly through the tall glass windows. Althea shook her head slowly. You know what the worst part is? Her voice had dropped. Not loud anymore. Just tired. I actually felt sorry for you. Ronan closed his eyes for a moment. I know. You don't know, she shot back quickly. You have no idea. Her voice rose again. Do you remember the first week I started working here? He nodded slightly. You kept bumping into the corner of the kitchen island, she said. And I kept telling you. Careful, it's right there. Her lips trembled faintly. And every time you said thank you like you were embarrassed that you needed help. She laughed softly. A broken little laugh. Well, She wiped beneath one eye quickly. I guess that was a performance too, right? Ronan's jaw tightened. No. Oh, please. Althea. No. Her hand lifted again, stopping him. You don't get to talk like we're having a calm conversation. She took a slow breath. But it came out shaky. Because right now all I can think about is how stupid I must look. You don't. Yes, I do. Her voice cracked. I walked around this house thinking I was helping someone. Her eyes locked onto his. But really I was just entertaining you. That's not what this was. Her shoulders rose with a long breath. Then, what was it, Ronan? The question hung there, heavy, demanding an answer. Ronan rubbed a hand slowly across the back of his neck. For the first time since the argument started, he looked unsure. Well, he exhaled. It started as a test. Althea stared at him. A long, quiet stare. Then she nodded slowly. Of course it did. Her voice sounded almost numb now. You thought I was after your money. Yes. The word came out before he could stop it. Althea laughed again. That bitter little laugh. Wow. She turned away slightly. Well, another breath. At least you're honest now. Ronan stepped forward cautiously. I didn't think you were different at first. She turned back toward him quickly. Oh, really? Her eyes flashed. And when exactly did you decide I wasn't some greedy woman trying to rob you? Ronan hesitated. Just for a second. But she noticed. Go ahead, she said quietly. I'm curious. Ronan looked down briefly, then back up at her. The storm. Her brows pulled together slightly. What? The night the power went out, he said. You guided me to the couch. Althea frowned. That was my job. I know. He swallowed slowly. But you didn't have to hold my hand like that. She blinked. What does that have to do with anything? Ronan's voice softened. Because you didn't do it out of obligation. He paused. You did it because you thought I was scared. Althea opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Ronan continued quietly. And that was the first moment I realized you weren't pretending. She shook her head slightly. So what? You just kept pretending after that. Ronan looked at the floor briefly. Yes. Her eyes widened. You're unbelievable. He lifted his gaze back to hers. But I stopped. She froze. What? I stopped pretending weeks ago. The room went silent again. Althea blinked slowly. Wait. Her voice came out softer now. You stopped pretending? Yes. Her confusion quickly turned into anger again. And you still didn't tell me? Ronan ran a hand through his hair. Althea, I tried to... No, you didn't. I did. When? He hesitated again. And that hesitation made her laugh. Exactly. Ronan stepped closer. Just one step, but it felt like closing miles. I didn't tell you because by the time I realized I needed to... He stopped, the words catching somewhere in his throat. Althea watched him carefully. Her anger was still there, but now something else had slipped in too. Curiosity. Well, she said quietly. What stopped you? Ronan inhaled slowly. The kind of breath someone takes when they know what they're about to say will change everything. I couldn't. Her brows furrowed. Why not? He looked directly into her eyes. Because there was no point hiding anymore. His voice came out low, almost rough. Because I was already in love with you. The words landed between them like thunder. Althea froze, completely still. Her eyes widened. What? Ronan didn't look away. I fell in love with you. Silence swallowed the room. Althea stared at him, like her brain was struggling to process what she just heard. You're joking. I'm not. She shook her head slowly. No. Her voice trembled now. No. You don't get to say that. Why not? Because you lied to me. Her voice rose again. You tested me. I know. You watched me when I didn't know you could see. His chest tightened. I know. And now you think you can fix that by saying you're in love with me? Ronan shook his head. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? He stepped forward again, carefully, like approaching something fragile. I'm telling you the truth. Althea stared at him, her breathing uneven again. You expect me to believe that? No. He shook his head slowly. I expect you to hate me right now. That caught her off guard. She blinked. What? I expect you to be angry. He swallowed. Because if someone did that to my sister, I'd probably throw them out of the house. Her lips parted slightly. Ronan's voice softened even more. But I need you to know something before you walk away. A pause, a long one. Althea waited. Ronan looked at her like a man standing on the edge of something dangerous. The moment I realized you were different, he exhaled slowly, was the moment I realized I had already fallen for you. Althea didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding, because the anger inside her chest was suddenly tangled with something far more confusing, something she didn't want to admit, and Ronan could see it in her eyes, that hesitation, that tiny crack in her anger. And for the first time since the argument started, neither of them knew what would happen next. The room stayed silent, not calm, not peaceful, just still. Althea hadn't moved. Her arms were no longer folded as tightly as before, but they hadn't dropped either. She looked at Ronan like someone staring at a door they didn't know whether to open. or slam shut. You're in love with me. The words left her mouth slowly, like she was testing them. Ronan nodded once. Quiet, certain, yes. Althea let out a long breath. She looked away toward the wide glass windows facing the ocean. The waves were still crashing softly against the rocks below the cliff. Calm, completely unaware that inside the house, two lives had just collided in a way neither of them expected. She rubbed her forehead slowly. Well, that's convenient, isn't it? Her voice carried exhaustion now, not rage. Just tired disbelief. You lie to someone for weeks, pretend you're blind, watch them when they think they're alone. Her voice trailed off. Then she looked back at him. And suddenly you're in love. Ronan didn't interrupt, didn't argue. He just stood there, breathing slowly, waiting, because he knew something she didn't yet realize. This moment right here, this fragile pause between anger and heartbreak, was the moment everything could fall apart, or begin. Althea stared at him again, long, careful, trying to understand the man standing in front of her, trying to decide if the confession she just heard was honest, or just another manipulation. Finally, she spoke again, quietly. You really expect me to believe that? Ronan shook his head slowly. No. A pause. I expect you to question everything. Her lips parted slightly, then closed again. Another breath. She turned away again, just slightly, her shoulders rising with a slow inhale, because part of her wanted to walk out of the room right now. Walk out of the house. Walk out of his life completely. But another part of her, well, that part was still standing there, still listening, still wondering. And that's the part that made this moment so dangerous, for both of them. Ronan opened his mouth like he was about to say something else. But before the words came out, let me pause right here for a second, Suga. Yeah. Because this moment, this right here, it's where most people watching would probably be asking themselves the same question Althea is thinking. How did things even get this complicated? How does a strong, proud woman end up standing in the living room of a millionaire who pretended to be blind and somehow still feel something for him? Yeah, I know. It sounds crazy. But trust me, this story gets deeper than you think. So before we keep going, go ahead and hit that like button. Seriously. It helps the story reach more people, and it lets YouTube know you're enjoying what you're hearing. And if you're new here, well, welcome to Ms. Wink Stories. This channel is where we tell stories about love, mistakes, second chances, and the complicated ways people find each other when life knocks them down. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. All right. Now, take a breath with me for a second. Because to understand why a powerful man like Ronan Ashford would pretend to be blind, and why a woman like Althea Rivers would feel torn between walking away or staying, we have to go back, way back, back before the argument, before the confession, before the night she discovered the truth, back to the moment when none of this had happened yet, back to the beginning. And trust me, the beginning explains everything. Long before the argument in the Malibu mansion, before the accusation, before the night Althea stood in that living room with anger trembling in her voice, Ronan Ashford lived in a completely different world. San Francisco, not the quiet ocean cliffs. No, the city was loud, busy, alive with ambition. Glass towers filled with people chasing the next big idea, and Ronan had always been one of those people. He wasn't born rich, not even close. His father ran a small electrical repair shop in Sacramento. His mother worked long shifts at a community hospital. Growing up, money was something the Ashford family respected, but rarely had enough of. Ronan remembered watching his parents count bills at the kitchen table late at night. Quietly, carefully, sometimes whispering so the kids wouldn't hear. But he heard anyway. Kids always do. And somewhere in those quiet nights, something settled into his mind. A simple thought. I don't ever want to live like this. Not the fear, not the constant calculating. So Ronan became the kind of kid teachers described with a raised eyebrow and a slow nod. Quiet, but very sharp. He wasn't the loud genius type. No, he listened more than he spoke, watched more than he reacted. Even back then, he studied people, studied systems, studied patterns. At 19, he left home and enrolled at Stanford. Computer science, investment modeling, artificial intelligence, all the things that made the future look profitable. But college wasn't where his real education happened. No, that came later, in small offices filled with ambitious founders who talked too fast and dreamed too big. Ronan started investing early, not with millions, just a few $1,000s he had scraped together through internships and small consulting projects. Most people his age were trying to figure out what they wanted from life. Ronan already knew control, freedom, security. His first investment doubled, the second tripled. By the time he was 30, Ronan Ashford had quietly built something most people didn't even realize existed: a private investment firm. Small, selective, but extremely effective. He didn't chase attention. He didn't appear in interviews. He stayed behind the numbers, behind the decisions, and slowly, money began to grow around him like gravity pulling things closer. Startups sought his approval. Investors wanted his insight. By 35, Ronan wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful. Not flashy powerful. No, the quiet kind. The kind where people lowered their voices when you walked into a room. But there was one thing Ronan never quite mastered during those early years. People. Oh, he understood them intellectually. He knew what motivated investors, what frightened founders, what excited venture capitalists. But emotionally? That part was always complicated. He dated occasionally, went to events, shared dinners with women who admired his success. But something about those relationships always felt temporary, surface level, like conversations that never quite reached the deeper parts of life. Until one night. That night changed everything. It happened during a technology charity gala in San Francisco. A room filled with polished shoes, elegant dresses, and conversations about innovation. Ronan had only attended because one of his partners insisted. "You need to socialize sometimes," the partner told him earlier that week. Ronan remembered sighing. "Well, if I must." And that's when he saw her, across the room, standing near the balcony doors, laughing softly with a group of guests. She was beautiful, not just physically. There was a kind of warmth in the way she moved, the way she listened when people spoke. Ronan noticed something strange immediately. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. That caught his attention, because most people at events like that were performing, networking, selling versions of themselves. But she seemed relaxed, authentic, and when their eyes finally met across the room, well, that was the moment Ronan Ashford made the first emotional mistake of his life. He walked over. "Good evening," he said. She turned toward him, smiled. Not the polite kind, the genuine kind. "Well, hi." Her voice was soft but confident. "You must be Ronan Ashford." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "You've heard of me?" She nodded. "Of course." A small pause. "My brother works in venture funding." Ronan nodded slowly. "Well, I hope he hasn't told you anything embarrassing." She laughed. "No." Another pause. "He actually said you're the most careful investor he's ever seen." Ronan tilted his head slightly. "That sounds like a polite way of saying I'm difficult." She shrugged gently. "Or maybe it means you're smart enough not to trust everything you hear." That answer stayed with him, because it sounded like someone who understood the world the same way he did. Carefully, quietly, thoughtfully, and for the first time in years, Ronan Ashford felt something unfamiliar. Interest. Real interest. Not curiosity about business, not attraction built on status. Something more personal. Something that made him stay at that balcony conversation far longer than he originally planned. Much longer. In fact, looking back later, Ronan would realize something important about that night. It wasn't the beginning of his success. He already had that. No, that night was the beginning of the mistake that would change him forever. That conversation on the balcony, it didn't end quickly. Ronan originally planned to stay maybe 10 minutes. Polite conversation, then leave. That was his usual pattern. But that night, well, 10 minutes turned into almost an hour. They talked about simple things at first. Work, technology, the city, nothing too personal. But something about her made the conversation easy, too easy. At one point she laughed softly and said, "You know, I expected you to be intimidating." Ronan raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" She nodded. "My brother talks about you like you're some kind of financial machine." He chuckled quietly. "Well, that's flattering." She tilted her head. "But you're not like that at all." He studied her for a moment. "And what am I like?" She thought about it. Then she smiled. Quiet. A pause. Careful. Another pause. And a little lonely. That last word caught him off guard. Ronan blinked. "Well, that's a bold assumption." She shrugged. "Maybe." Then she extended her hand. "I'm Celeste." He took her hand. Ronan, her handshake was warm, confident, not nervous, and for reasons he didn't fully understand yet, Ronan didn't want that moment to end. After that night they began seeing each other. At first it was casual, dinner once a week, coffee after work, long walks through the quieter parts of San Francisco. Celeste had a calm presence. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, her voice had this gentle rhythm that made people feel comfortable. Looking back, Ronan would later wonder if that was intentional. But at the time, he didn't question it, because something about her made the noise in his mind slow down. One evening they were sitting at a small restaurant near the waterfront. Celeste leaned back in her chair and watched him for a moment. "You're always thinking," she said. Ronan glanced up from his glass. "Occupational hazard." She smiled. "Well, stop thinking for a second." He frowned slightly. "That sounds dangerous." She laughed softly. "I'm serious." A pause. "When was the last time you just enjoyed something?" Ronan opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. He actually didn't know. Celeste noticed the hesitation. "See?" she said quietly. "You work too much." He shrugged. "That's how things get built." She leaned forward slightly. "And what happens when everything is built?" He looked at her. "Well, then you enjoy it." Her eyes softened. "You should start doing that now." Moments like that stayed with him. Small conversations, little pieces of advice. She made his life feel balanced. Within a year, Celeste wasn't just someone he dated. She was part of his world. She attended business events with him, met some of his colleagues, even visited his office a few times. People liked her. Actually, that's not quite accurate. People loved her. She was charming without trying too hard. Polite, warm, the kind of person who remembered small details about people's lives. Birthdays, family stories, favorite foods. Ronan admired that about her, because he himself wasn't naturally like that. He focused on systems, strategies, results. But Celeste? She focused on people. And slowly, without Ronan really noticing how it happened, she began to understand every corner of his life, his schedule, his investments, his business partnerships, everything. Not through interrogation. No. Through conversation, curiosity, interest. And Ronan, he welcomed it. Because for the first time in his life, trust felt easy. 2 years after that balcony conversation, Ronan proposed. It wasn't dramatic. No giant crowd. No elaborate plan. Just the two of them walking along the Golden Gate Bridge one quiet evening. The wind was strong that night. Celeste laughed while trying to keep her hair out of her face. Ronan stopped walking. She noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" He reached into his coat pocket. "Well, He cleared his throat slightly. I'm not very good at speeches. She looked confused. Ronan. He opened the small ring box. Her eyes widened. Oh. A pause. A long one. The wind rushing past them. People walking by. But in that moment, it felt like the entire bridge had gone quiet. Ronan looked a little nervous now. Well, Celeste, he exhaled slowly. You make my life feel less mechanical. She laughed softly through her surprise. That's a strange proposal. He smiled faintly. It's an honest one. Her eyes began to shine. Yes, she nodded quickly. Yes, of course. And just like that, Ronan Ashford believed he had found the one person in the world he could trust completely. He had no idea that belief would cost him millions, and something far more important than money. Marriage changed Ronan's life. Not dramatically at first. No. The changes were small, quiet, the kind people barely notice while they're happening. The two of them moved into a modern house overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Not a mansion. Ronan had the money for that, but Celeste insisted on something simpler. One evening while they were standing on the balcony watching the sunset, she said, You know, I don't want to live in some giant palace. Ronan leaned against the railing. Oh? She nodded. I want a home, not a museum. He smiled faintly. Well, that sounds reasonable. She slipped her hand into his. Besides, she added softly, I didn't marry you for your money. Those words meant something to him, because deep down that had always been a quiet fear. But hearing her say it like that, so calmly, so naturally, it made him relax. For the first time in years, Ronan felt like he could let his guard down. A few months later, Celeste started visiting his office more often. At first it was harmless. She'd stop by with lunch, sit quietly in the corner while he finished calls. Sometimes she'd ask questions about what he was working on. Not aggressive questions, just curious ones. One afternoon she sat across from his desk, watching him review a stack of reports. Can I ask you something? She said. Ronan didn't look up yet. Sure. How do you decide which companies to invest in? He shrugged slightly. Patterns. She tilted her head. What kind of patterns? Now he looked up. Well, leadership quality, product potential, financial projections. She nodded slowly. A pause. That sounds exhausting. He chuckled. It is. Another pause. Then she said something that stayed in his mind. You know, sometimes I think you're too careful. Ronan raised an eyebrow. Too careful? She smiled. Well, you always play it safe. He leaned back in his chair. That's why my investments succeed. She shrugged. Maybe. Another pause. But sometimes the biggest rewards come from taking a chance. Ronan studied her for a moment. Are you suggesting I change my strategy? She laughed lightly. No. Then she leaned forward a little. I'm just saying, maybe you trust numbers more than people. At the time, Ronan thought she was just teasing him. Just playful conversation. He didn't see anything strange about it. But slowly, little conversations like that started happening more often. Small suggestions, tiny opinions, nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. But over time, Celeste began to understand how his business worked, who his partners were, which investments mattered most. And Ronan? Well, he didn't see any danger in that. Why would he? She was his wife, the person he trusted most in the world. One night during dinner, she brought something up casually. You remember that startup you mentioned last week? She asked. Ronan nodded. The renewable energy one? Yeah. She twirled her fork slowly. Why didn't you invest in them? He shrugged. Risk level was too high. She tilted her head again. But what if they succeed? Ronan smiled slightly. Then someone else gets rich. She laughed softly. A pause. Or maybe you're passing on something big. Ronan didn't argue. He just took another bite of his food. But later that night, while reviewing his reports again, he found himself thinking about what she said. just a thought. Nothing more. At least, that's what he believed at the time. Because he still didn't realize something important. Celeste wasn't pushing hard. She wasn't forcing decisions. No, she was doing something far more subtle. She was slowly shaping the way he thought. And Ronan, well, he trusted her enough not to question it. The investment didn't happen all at once. No. It started with one conversation, then another, then a quiet suggestion during dinner. One evening, Ronan was reviewing documents at the dining table when Celeste walked in with 2 glasses of wine. She placed one beside him. "You're still working?" she asked softly. Ronan sighed. "Just finishing a review." She sat across from him. "Is it that renewable energy company again?" He looked up. "Yeah." She studied his face for a moment. Well, what? Did you decide?" Ronan leaned back in his chair. "I'm still not convinced." She took a small sip of wine. A pause. "You know what I think?" He raised an eyebrow. "That you're going to tell me anyway." She smiled. "I think you're afraid of making a mistake." Ronan frowned slightly. "I make decisions based on logic." She leaned forward a little. "Or maybe you're protecting what you already built." Her voice stayed calm. "But sometimes protecting everything means missing something bigger." Ronan looked at the paperwork again. He tapped the table lightly with his finger. Thinking, calculating. Then he asked quietly, "You really believe in them?" She nodded. "I do." Another pause. Longer this time. Ronan finally closed the folder. "Well," he exhaled. "All right." Celeste's eyes lifted. "You're serious?" "I'll back them." She smiled slowly. "Not too big, just enough. I think that's a smart move." At the time, Ronan believed that decision was his. Looking back later, he would realize it wasn't. Over the next few months, the investment expanded. More capital, more partnerships, money moving through multiple accounts, all normal in the world of venture funding. Ronan didn't question the transfers. Why would he? Everything looked legitimate. The paperwork was clean. The numbers made sense. And Celeste? She seemed proud of him, supportive, even excited. One evening, she wrapped her arms around him while he was working in the office. "I knew you'd make the right call," she whispered. Ronan smiled faintly. "Well, we'll see." She kissed his cheek. "Oh, we will." At the time, he thought she meant success. He didn't realize she meant something else entirely. The warning signs came quietly. One of his financial managers mentioned a delay in one account. "Probably a processing issue," the manager said over the phone. Ronan didn't worry. These things happen sometimes. Another week passed. Another minor delay, then another, each one small enough to ignore. But together, they were building towards something Ronan hadn't yet seen. Until one morning. Yeah, that morning. It started like any other. Coffee, emails, routine. Then his phone rang. His financial director. Ronan answered calmly. "Morning." The voice on the other end sounded tense. "Ronan, we need to talk." Ronan sat up slightly. "What's wrong?" A pause. A long one. Then the words came. "There's money missing." Ronan frowned. "How much?" Another pause. "Millions." The room suddenly felt very quiet. Ronan stood slowly. "That's impossible." The director exhaled. "We checked 3 times. Ronan's voice hardened. "Where did it go?" Another pause. Then, "That's the problem. We think." It was transferred through accounts connected to Celeste. Silence. Total silence. For a few seconds, Ronan didn't breathe, didn't speak, didn't move. Then he whispered, "What?" Ronan didn't hang up the phone right away. He just stood there, still, the words from his financial director echoing in his ears. Accounts connected to Celeste. That didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. He rubbed a hand across his face slowly. "No," he muttered quietly. "There has to be a mistake." But the voice on the phone sounded certain. We traced the transfers twice. Ronan's chest tightened. Call the bank again, he said. I already did. Another pause. The director's voice dropped slightly. Ronan, she authorized them. Silence. Ronan lowered the phone slowly. His hand felt strangely heavy, like it belonged to someone else. For a moment he just stood in the middle of his office, trying to think, trying to breathe, trying to convince himself this was some kind of misunderstanding. Finally, he grabbed his keys. He drove home faster than he probably should have. The streets of San Francisco blurred past the windshield. Traffic lights, buildings, pedestrians. None of it really registered. His mind kept repeating one sentence. She wouldn't do that. Right? When Ronan pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. Quiet, peaceful, nothing out of place. That almost made it worse. He walked inside quickly. Celeste? No answer. He checked the kitchen. Empty. Living room. Empty. A strange feeling started building in his chest now. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. He moved toward the bedroom. The door was open. Ronan stepped inside, then stopped. The closet was half empty. His eyes moved slowly across the room. Drawers open. Suitcases gone. The air suddenly felt heavy. He walked over to the dresser. There was a small envelope sitting on top, his name written on it. Just one word. Ronan. His hand hovered above the envelope for a second. Then he picked it up, opened it. Inside was a short note. Not even a full page. He read it once, then again, then a third time. Each time the words felt sharper, colder. I'm sorry you had to find out like this. You're brilliant with numbers, Ronan, but you never really understood people. I needed a different life. Take care of yourself. That was it. No explanation, no apology that meant anything. Just a goodbye. Ronan lowered the paper slowly. His chest felt tight now. He sat down on the edge of the bed. For a long time he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react, just stared at the floor. It wasn't just the money. Yes, millions were gone. But that wasn't the part that broke something inside him. It was the realization that every moment of trust, every conversation, every smile, might have been part of a plan. And that thought stayed with him. The media found out quickly, faster than Ronan expected. Within days, the story spread across financial news outlets. Then, tabloids picked it up. Headlines started appearing online. Ronan tried not to look. But one afternoon, his business partner walked into the office holding a phone. You should probably see this. Ronan took it. The headline was impossible to miss. The blind fool of Silicon Valley. He stared at the screen. Blind. That word stuck with him, because according to the articles, Ronan Ashford, the careful investor, had been completely fooled by his own wife. The comments online were worse. People laughing, mocking, questioning how someone so intelligent could miss something so obvious. Ronan set the phone down slowly. He didn't argue with anyone, didn't give interviews, didn't try to defend himself. Instead, he did something else. He withdrew. Months passed. He sold the San Francisco house, closed his office there, moved south, Malibu, a quiet cliffside property overlooking the ocean, far from the noise, far from the gossip, far from people who thought they understood what happened. The house was large, too large for one person really, but Ronan didn't mind the silence. In fact, he preferred it, because silence didn't lie, silence didn't manipulate, silence didn't steal millions and disappear. Over time, something inside him hardened. The man who once believed love could be simple changed. He became careful again, not just in business, in life, especially with women. Trust became something he studied, measured, tested. One evening he stood alone on the balcony of the Malibu house, staring out at the dark ocean. The wind moved softly through the air. Ronan folded his arms, thinking, if someone new ever entered his life again, if anyone ever walked into his house pretending to be honest, He wouldn't be fooled twice. No. Next time, he would be the one watching. He would be the one testing. And if anyone came close enough to his world again, they would have to prove who they really were, even if it meant pretending to be something he wasn't. Long before Althea Rivers ever stepped foot inside Ronan Ashford's Malibu mansion, her life was already shaped by a completely different world. Oakland, California. Oakland wasn't quiet like Malibu. It had rhythm, movement, voices on sidewalks, music drifting from open windows during warm evenings. People who knew each other, people who looked out for each other. Althea grew up in a modest 2-story house near East Oakland. Nothing fancy, just a home filled with life, laughter, arguments from the kitchen, the smell of food cooking late into the evening. Her mother, Denise Rivers, believed in 2 things more than anything else: work and dignity. Denise worked long hours as a nurse's aide. Some mornings she left before the sun rose. Other nights she came home long after dinner time. But no matter how tired she was, she always checked on her daughters first. Althea remembered one night clearly. She was about 12 years old, sitting at the kitchen table finishing homework. Her mother walked in, dropping her bag by the door with a soft sigh. Long day?" Althea asked quietly. Denise chuckled softly. "Well, every day is long when you work in a hospital." She walked over and kissed the top of Althea's head. "But it's honest work." Althea nodded slowly. Even at 12, she understood something about her mother. Denise Rivers never complained about life. She simply faced it, head on. And that quiet strength, well, it became the foundation of the woman Althea would grow into. Because growing up in Oakland meant learning certain things early. How to stand up for yourself. How to read people. How to keep moving forward even when life got complicated. Those lessons stayed with her. And years later, they would be the exact reason Ronan Ashford underestimated her. Sunday mornings in the Rivers family had a routine. No alarms needed. By 8 o'clock, the house was already awake. Music playing softly from the living room. The smell of hair products and perfume drifting through the hallway. Church was not optional in Denise Rivers' house. Not even close. "Althea, you ready?" Her mother would call from the doorway. "Almost." Althea answered once, rushing to put on her shoes. Denise raised an eyebrow. "You said that 15 minutes ago." Althea laughed. "Well, I'm ready now." The church sat a few blocks away, a red brick building that had stood in the neighborhood for decades. Inside, the atmosphere felt alive, voices singing, hands clapping, people greeting each other like family, because for many of them, that's exactly what they were, family in spirit if not by blood. Althea grew up surrounded by that sense of community, women who checked on each other, older men who offered advice whether you asked for it or not, children running through the courtyard after service, and every summer, family cookouts. Those cookouts were legendary in the Rivers family. Uncles arguing about sports, aunties guarding secret recipes, cousins laughing loudly under the afternoon sun. Althea's cousins were especially protective. 3 older boys who treated her like she was still 10 years old, even when she was well into her 20s. One of them once warned a boy who tried flirting with her at a cookout. "You better treat our cousin right," he said, half joking. But also, not joking. Althea rolled her eyes. "Y'all act like I can't handle myself." Her cousin shrugged. "We know you can." He smiled. "We just like reminding people." That environment did something important for Althea. It taught her that love wasn't always soft. Sometimes it was loud, protective, unapologetic. And somewhere deep inside, that belief shaped how she approached relationships. Because she expected respect, nothing less. Althea didn't rush into love easily. No. She had always been careful. But when she met Marcus, well, things felt different. He was charming, funny, the kind of man who knew how to make people feel seen. They met at a friend's birthday gathering in downtown Oakland. At first it was casual, conversations, late-night phone calls, coffee dates, Marcus listened when she spoke. He remembered small things: her favorite music, her work schedule, the way she liked her coffee. Those details made him seem thoughtful, reliable, and slowly, Althea let her guard down. 2 years passed. They talked about moving in together, building a future. Marcus often spoke about starting his own business. "Just need the right opportunity," he said once. Althea believed him. That belief cost her more than she expected. At first, the help she gave him seemed small: covering a bill, helping with rent when he was between jobs. Then came a bigger request. "I just need a little support to get started," Marcus explained one evening. She hesitated, but he looked sincere, determined. So she helped. Savings she had worked years to build slowly disappeared into his plans. But the business never seemed to start. Excuses came instead. Delays, unexpected problems. One night, Althea returned home earlier than expected. The apartment was quiet. Marcus wasn't there, but his laptop sat open on the table. At first, she wasn't even trying to look, but something caught her attention. A message on the screen, then another, conversations with another woman, plans, promises, money discussions. Her heart dropped slowly. She sat there staring at the screen, breathing quietly, trying to understand. When Marcus finally walked through the door later that night, he knew immediately something was wrong. "Althea, she looked up slowly. "You lied to me." No yelling, no dramatic scene, just those words. Calm, steady. Marcus tried explaining, excuses, apologies, but something inside her had already shifted. She stood up. "Well," her voice remained quiet. "You should leave." Marcus blinked. "What?" "You heard me." A pause. "You should leave." And just like that, the relationship ended. After Marcus left, life became quiet again. Not peaceful quiet, just empty. Althea returned to her mother's house for a while. One evening they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. Denise noticed the heaviness in her daughter's eyes. "You still thinking about him?" she asked gently. Althea shrugged. Sometimes." Her mother nodded slowly. "Heartbreak does that." A pause. The wind moved softly through the trees. Then Denise turned toward her. "Baby, listen to me." Althea looked up. Her mother's voice softened but stayed firm. "Dignity will take you further than begging someone to love you." The words settled between them quietly. Althea blinked slowly. "I know." Denise reached over and squeezed her hand. "You walked away with nothing." Another pause. "But you kept your pride." Althea inhaled slowly. "Well, pride doesn't pay bills." Her mother chuckled softly. "No," a small smile. "But it keeps your heart clean." That sentence stayed with her. And from that day forward, Althea promised herself something. She would never again shrink her worth just to keep someone in her life. Months passed. Althea rebuilt her routine: work, helping her mother around the house, spending time with family. But something inside her still felt restless. She needed a fresh start. One afternoon, her cousin mentioned something during lunch. "You ever thought about working down south?" he asked. Althea frowned. "Down south where?" "Malibu." She raised an eyebrow. "Malibu?" "Yeah." He pulled out his phone. "There's this live-in house manager position." She leaned closer. "For who?" He shrugged. "Some private investor." The idea sounded strange at first, leaving Oakland, living inside someone else's house. But the job offered stability, good pay, a chance to start over somewhere new. That night, Althea sat on the edge of her bed thinking. Long. Quiet. Finally, she exhaled. Well, maybe it was time. Time to step into something different. A few weeks later, she packed her bags, said goodbye to her family, and drove south along the California coast, toward Malibu, toward the massive house on the cliffs, toward the man whose broken trust would collide with her unshakable dignity. Neither of them knew it yet. But that job, that single decision, was about to change both of their lives. The drive from Oakland to Malibu took most of the day. Althea left early that morning, her car packed with 2 suitcases, a few boxes, and the quiet determination she had carried since leaving Marcus behind. The highway stretched along the California coast for miles, ocean on one side, mountains on the other. For long stretches of the drive, the only sound in the car was the hum of the engine, and her thoughts. She kept thinking about what her mother said that evening on the porch. Dignity will take you further than begging someone to love you. Althea tightened her grip on the steering wheel slightly. Well, she murmured softly to herself, let's see where dignity takes me. By late afternoon, the Malibu coastline finally came into view. Cliffside homes, private roads, tall gates protecting properties that most people only saw in magazines. Her phone's GPS directed her toward a winding road overlooking the Pacific. Eventually, the navigation voice spoke again. You have arrived. Althea slowed the car. In front of her stood a tall iron gate. Beyond it, a massive house sat quietly on the edge of the cliffs. The place was enormous. Glass walls reflecting the late afternoon sun, stone walkways winding through carefully maintained gardens. She exhaled slowly. For a moment she just sat there behind the wheel. Then she shook her head lightly. Well, here we go. She pressed the call button beside the gate. A speaker crackled softly. A man's voice answered. Yes? Hi, Althea said. My name is Althea Rivers. I'm here about the house manager position. A short pause. Then, the gate will open. The iron bars slowly slid apart. Her car rolled forward. As she drove up the long driveway, something about the property felt quiet, not empty, just still, like a place where someone preferred distance from the outside world. She parked near the front entrance and stepped out of the car. The ocean breeze brushed lightly against her face. Beautiful place, she murmured. But beauty wasn't the first thing she felt. The place felt private, almost guarded, like the house itself had learned not to trust strangers. And somewhere inside those walls, Ronan Ashford was waiting. The front door opened before Althea even knocked. A middle-aged man wearing a neatly pressed suit greeted her. You must be Miss Rivers. Yes. He extended a hand. My name is Elliot. I manage certain affairs for Mr. Ashford. She shook his hand politely. Nice to meet you. He gestured toward the interior of the house. Please come in. The inside of the mansion was even larger than it looked from outside. Wide hallways, high ceilings, soft lighting reflecting across polished floors. But something about the place still felt quiet, almost lonely. Elliot walked ahead of her. Mr. Ashford is in the living room. Althea nodded. As they entered the room, she noticed him immediately. Ronan Ashford sat near the large windows overlooking the ocean. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair slightly tousled. But something else stood out. A white cane rested against the side of his chair. And his eyes, they didn't quite focus on the room. Althea slowed slightly. Elliot spoke first. Mr. Ashford, Miss Rivers has arrived. Ronan turned his head slightly toward the sound of Elliot's voice, then toward Althea's footsteps. His expression remained calm, measured. Thank you, Elliot, he said quietly. Elliot nodded and left the room. The door closed softly behind him. Now it was just the two of them. Ronan tilted his head slightly. You're Althea? Yes. Her voice was steady. Ronan nodded slowly. Please, sit. She walked toward the chair across from him. As she sat down, she studied him briefly. The cane, the way his gaze remained slightly unfocused. So the rumors were true. He couldn't see. Ronan rested his hands loosely together. You drove all the way from Oakland? Yes. That's a long trip. She shrugged lightly. Well, good opportunities are usually worth the drive. That answer made the corner of Ronan's mouth lift slightly. Interesting. Ronan leaned back slightly in his chair. His voice remained calm, but there was something deliberate about his tone now. "You'll be managing the house?" Althea nodded. "Yes." A short pause followed. Then Ronan continued, "But there's a complication." Her eyebrow lifted slightly. "Oh?" Ronan rested his hand near the cane. "Well," he exhaled quietly, "I won't always know what's happening inside my own house." Althea didn't respond immediately. She understood what he meant, but she wanted him to say it directly. Ronan continued, "Because I can't see." The words landed gently in the room, still, measured. Then he added something that surprised her. "So, technically," a pause, "you could steal from me." Althea blinked once. There it was, the test. She leaned back slightly in her chair, studying him. Then she answered calmly, "If I wanted your money." Her voice remained steady. "I wouldn't apply for a housekeeping job." Silence followed, just the quiet sound of ocean waves outside the window. Ronan's head tilted slightly, like he was studying her response. Then he asked, "You don't sound offended." Althea shrugged lightly. "Well," a small pause, "you don't sound trusting." For the first time since the conversation started, Ronan smiled. Not a big smile, just a small one. Because most people reacted differently to that test. They either became defensive or overly polite. But Althea? She simply answered honestly, and that intrigued him. The silence stretched for a moment longer. Ronan tapped his finger lightly against the arm of the chair. You're very direct," he said. Althea crossed one leg over the other. "I find it saves time." He chuckled softly. "Well, that's efficient." She glanced briefly around the room. "You seem like someone who values efficiency." "That's true." Another quiet pause followed. Then Ronan spoke again. "Tell me something." She looked back at him. "All right, why take this job?" Althea didn't answer immediately. She thought about the question, about Marcus, about Oakland, about the quiet promise she made to herself after that relationship ended. Finally, she spoke. "Well," her voice softened slightly, "sometimes you need a new place to start over." Ronan nodded slowly. He understood that feeling more than most people, even if she didn't know it yet. Another pause. Then he said, "If you work here, trust will matter." Althea met his gaze, even though his eyes didn't quite focus on hers. "I agree." Ronan nodded once. "And trust isn't something I give easily." Her response came just as calm. "Then I guess we'll both have something to prove." That answer lingered in the room, because Ronan realized something in that moment. This woman didn't seem intimidated by him, not by the house, not by the money, and definitely not by his test. That alone made him curious. Now, let's pause right here for a second, because this moment, it's important. Think about what just happened. A powerful man who doesn't trust people, testing a woman he just met, and a woman who refuses to shrink herself just to keep a job. So let me ask you something. If you discovered your boss was secretly testing you like this, would you stay, or would you walk away? Take a second and think about it. Then tell me in the comments, because everyone handles trust differently. And trust me, this story is just getting started. Also, don't forget to like the video. Seriously, that little button helps YouTube show this story to more people. And if you're enjoying the story so far, well, you already know what to do. Subscribe. Now, let's get back to Ronan and Althea, because neither of them realizes yet that this simple conversation in a Malibu living room is the beginning of something that will change both of their lives. The first week inside Ronan Ashford's Malibu mansion passed quietly. Almost too quietly. Althea spent most mornings learning the layout of the house. The property was enormous, hallways that stretched longer than most apartments, large windows overlooking the Pacific, rooms that looked untouched. Ronan stayed mostly in his study during the day, occasionally stepping into the living room or onto the balcony overlooking the cliffs. But the evenings, The evenings were different. One night, Althea stood in the kitchen preparing dinner. The kitchen itself was massive. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, everything organized with careful precision. Still, the space felt strangely empty. She stirred a pot slowly while soft music played from her phone on the counter. Cooking had always been something that calmed her. Back in Oakland, she used to cook with her mother often, talking, laughing, arguing about seasoning. Here, it was just her and the quiet hum of the stove. Then she heard footsteps. Measured, careful. She turned slightly. Ronan entered the kitchen with his cane. His movements were deliberate, familiar with the space. "You're cooking," he said. Althea glanced at him. "Well, yes." A small smile crossed her face. "That usually happens in kitchens." Ronan paused, then chuckled softly. "Well, fair point." He leaned lightly against the edge of the counter. "What are you making?" "Chicken and vegetables." He nodded slowly. "Smells good." She studied him briefly. "You cook?" He shook his head. "No." A pause. "Not since college." Althea stirred the pot again. "Well, that's unfortunate." "Why?" "Because everyone should know how to cook at least one decent meal." Ronan tilted his head slightly. "Is that a rule?" She thought about it. More like common sense. He smiled faintly. The conversation stayed simple, easy, but something about the moment felt unexpectedly normal. Two people standing in a kitchen, talking about food, not about money, not about suspicion, just dinner. And Ronan noticed something he hadn't expected. The house didn't feel as empty with her in it. A few nights later, a storm rolled across the coastline. Malibu storms weren't common, but when they came fast. Wind shook the tall windows. Rain hit the glass in steady waves. Althea stood in the living room watching the ocean churn below the cliffs. She wrapped her arms around herself slightly. Didn't expect that tonight. Behind her, Ronan sat in a chair near the fireplace. "The weather changes quickly here," he said. Lightning flashed briefly across the sky. A loud crack of thunder followed. Althea jumped slightly. "Okay. That one was loud." Ronan smiled faintly. "You're not afraid of storms, are you?" "No," she said quickly, then paused. "Well, maybe a little." The lights flickered suddenly, then went out. The room dropped into darkness. Althea froze for a second. "Just a power surge," Ronan said calmly. She moved toward the side table where candles were stored. The darkness made the large room feel unfamiliar, different. As she lit the candle, warm light filled the space. Ronan stood slowly. "I should probably move away from the window." Althea stepped closer. "Here." She reached out instinctively. Her fingers gently touched his hand. "Let me guide you." The contact lasted only a moment, but both of them felt it. Something quiet, unexpected. Ronan allowed her to guide him toward the couch. Her hand remained lightly around his wrist. Steady, warm. When they reached the couch, she let go. But the sensation lingered. Ronan sat down slowly. Althea returned to the candle. Neither of them mentioned what just happened. But the room felt different now. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Althea managed the house, cleaning schedules, groceries, maintenance. Everything ran smoothly, but there were small moments throughout the day when Ronan needed help navigating the larger parts of the property. The house had long hallways, unexpected turns, steps leading down to the lower patio. One afternoon, he stood near the staircase, tapping his cane lightly. Althea noticed from across the room. "You heading outside?" she asked. "Yes." She walked over. "There's a step down here." Ronan nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated, then gently placed her hand on his arm. "Here, just follow me." They moved slowly through the hallway, her pace steady, his steps careful. At first it was just practical, guidance, nothing more. But the physical closeness became familiar. Her hand resting lightly on his arm, his shoulder brushing past hers when they passed through narrow doorways. Little moments. Quiet contact. One afternoon, Ronan said something unexpected. "You're very patient." Althea looked at him. "Well, someone has to be." He chuckled softly. "I suppose that's true." She released his arm once they reached the patio. But again, that brief touch lingered longer than expected. As days turned into weeks, conversations between them became more personal. Not suddenly. Gradually. One evening they sat on the balcony overlooking the ocean, the sun slowly lowering toward the horizon. Althea leaned against the railing. "You've lived here long?" she asked. Ronan nodded. "A few years." She studied the view. "Well, it's peaceful." "Yes." A pause followed. Then Ronan asked quietly, "What about you?" "What about me? Why leave Oakland?" She didn't answer immediately. Her fingers traced the edge of the railing. "Well, a long breath. Sometimes staying in the same place reminds you of things you'd rather forget." Ronan understood that. More than she knew. "Someone hurt you," he said quietly. Althea looked at him. You're very observant." "I listen carefully." She smiled faintly. "Yes, someone did." A pause. "But I walked away." Ronan nodded slowly. "That takes strength." She shrugged lightly. "It takes self-respect." The sun dipped lower behind the horizon. Neither of them spoke for a while after that. But something about that conversation lingered, a quiet understanding forming between them. Ronan Ashford had spent years studying people, learning to read behavior, patterns, intentions. So when Althea entered his life, he observed her carefully. More carefully than she realized. Some evenings, after she finished working, she would walk through the garden paths behind the house. Sometimes she called her mother. Sometimes she simply stood near the cliff, looking out at the ocean. Ronan watched those moments quietly from inside the house, not intrusively, just thoughtfully, because he noticed something unusual. She never acted differently when she thought no one was watching. She treated the house with care, spoke respectfully to the staff, handled responsibilities with quiet confidence. There was no performance, no attempt to impress him, no subtle attempts to gain favor, and slowly, something inside Ronan began to shift. The suspicion he carried for years started softening. Not completely. Not yet. But enough for curiosity to grow. At the same time, Althea remained emotionally careful around him. Professional, respectful, but distant. She never flirted, never crossed personal boundaries, never allowed herself to become too comfortable. And that distance, that distance intrigued Ronan more than anything else. Because for the first time since Celeste betrayed him, he was beginning to believe something unexpected. Althea Rivers might actually be genuine, and that realization made the quiet tension between them grow stronger every day. The afternoon had been unusually quiet. Ronan had spent most of the day in the city meeting with a financial advisor. Meetings like that normally stretched into evening, but this one ended earlier than expected. Much earlier. The driver pulled the car through the iron gate of the Malibu estate just after 5. Ronan stepped out slowly. The ocean breeze carried that familiar salty scent drifting up from the cliffs below. Usually when he returned home, the house followed its predictable rhythm. Soft music from the kitchen, footsteps moving through the hallway, the faint sound of Althea organizing something somewhere inside the house. But today, the place felt still. He walked inside quietly, his cane tapping softly against the polished floor. Tap, tap, tap. Then he paused. Something in the hallway caught his attention. Light. A thin strip of warm light spilling from the partially open door of the guest wing. Althea's room. Ronan stopped walking. He hadn't expected anyone to be in that part of the house at this hour. Usually she finished work around this time. Sometimes she went for a walk near the cliffside path. Other evenings, she called her mother back in Oakland. But today, she was inside. He turned his head slightly toward the doorway. The soft sound of movement reached him. A drawer closing. Ronan stood there for a moment, not planning to look, not planning to linger, just noticing. Then something changed. A quiet laugh came from inside the room. Althea's voice, soft, unaware, and for reasons he couldn't immediately explain, Ronan took one slow step closer. The hallway was quiet. Only the distant rhythm of the ocean rolled through the house, waves meeting the cliffs far below. Ronan stopped a few feet from the doorway. Althea's door wasn't closed, just slightly open. A warm line of lamplight stretched across the floor and into the hallway. He hadn't meant to notice. He certainly hadn't meant to linger. But the soft sound of movement inside the room reached him. A drawer sliding closed. Ronan turned his head slightly toward the opening. From where he stood, he could only see a portion of the room. The mirror near the wall, the edge of the bed, and Althea standing near the dresser. She hadn't noticed him. Her back faced the door. Her hair had come loose from the tie she usually wore while working, dark curls resting gently along her shoulders. For a moment she simply stood there, stretching her arms slowly as if releasing the tension of the day. Then she reached for the buttons of her blouse, one by one, unhurried, comfortable in the privacy of her own space. The soft fabric slid from her shoulders as she eased it off. The movement was simple, natural, not meant for anyone's eyes. And that was exactly what made the moment feel so intimate. Ronan felt his chest tighten slightly. He hadn't expected this, hadn't planned for it, but the quiet calm of the scene held him there for one brief moment longer than it should have. The warm lamplight inside the room brushed softly across her skin as she moved toward the bed. She picked up a loose shirt lying there, pausing briefly to sweep her hair back from the curve of her neck. A small, absent-minded gesture, the kind people make when they think they are completely alone. Ronan's breath slowed. Something about the moment unsettled him, not because it was improper. No, because it was honest, unfiltered, a glimpse of Althea without the careful distance she always kept around him. And suddenly Ronan realized something. He had never truly seen her like this before, not the composed house manager, not the guarded woman who kept conversations professional, just Althea, relaxed, unaware, real. The realization struck him deeper than he expected. His hand tightened slightly around the cane. This wasn't something he should witness. Not like this, not without her knowing. Ronan turned his head away quickly, the moment breaking as suddenly as it had begun. He stepped back from the doorway, the quiet tap of his cane returning to the hallway. But even as he walked away, that brief image lingered, soft, unexpected, and far more powerful than he wanted to admit. Ronan stepped back from the doorway, but he didn't move down the hallway right away. For a moment he just stood there, still, the soft glow from the room fading slightly as he turned away. His hand rested tightly around the handle of the cane. "Go," he murmured quietly under his breath. But the image had already settled in his mind, the quiet confidence in the way she moved, the absence of pretense, the simple ease of someone unaware they were being seen. Inside the room he heard the faint rustle of fabric again, the gentle movement of someone preparing for the evening. Nothing dramatic, just ordinary life unfolding behind a half-open door. And somehow, that ordinary moment felt more intimate than anything he had experienced in years. Ronan exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the quiet hallway. He forced himself to step away. One step, then another. The cane tapped softly against the polished floor. Tap, tap, tap. Each step carried him farther from the doorway. But not from the moment, because even as he walked toward his study, even as he placed the cane against the wall beside his desk, his mind drifted back there, back to the warm light, back to the quiet calm of her room, back to the simple, unguarded version of Althea he had never seen before. And that moment stayed with him far longer than it should have, not because of what he saw, but because of what it stirred, something slow, something unfamiliar, something he had spent years trying to lock away. Later that evening, Ronan sat alone in his study. The lights were low. The ocean outside was dark now, But his mind kept drifting back to the hallway, to the open door, to that unexpected moment. He leaned back in his chair slowly, closing his eyes. Why did that moment stay with him? It wasn't the first time he had seen a beautiful woman, not even close. But this felt different, because Althea had no idea anyone was watching. She wasn't trying to impress him, wasn't performing, wasn't seeking attention. She was simply herself, comfortable, relaxed, human, and that made the memory feel strangely intimate. Ronan opened his eyes again. He rubbed his forehead slowly. Well, he exhaled. This is ridiculous. But the memory returned again, uninvited, persistent, and he realized something unsettling. He hadn't felt that kind of awareness toward anyone in years. Over the next few days, Ronan tried to ignore the memory, focus on work, meetings, financial reports, but something had shifted. Whenever Althea walked into a room now, he noticed the quiet way she moved, the calm confidence in her voice, the small habits she had while working. And the memory of that evening lingered in the background of his mind, not inappropriate, not obsessive, just present. One evening, she passed through the living room carrying a stack of folded towels. "Do you need anything?" she asked. Ronan looked up from his chair. "No." A pause. Then he added quietly, "Thank you." She nodded and continued down the hallway. Ronan watched her leave, thoughtful, because for the first time since Celeste betrayed him, something inside the walls he built around his heart had shifted. Just slightly, not enough to break them. Not yet, but enough to create a small crack. And that crack would eventually change everything between the kitchen was warm that evening. Soft light hung above the counter. The quiet sound of vegetables sizzling in the pan filled the room. Althea stood near the stove, stirring slowly. It had been a strange day. Not bad, just strange. Ronan had been quieter than usual, more careful with his words, like someone thinking too much before speaking. She noticed it earlier that afternoon when he passed through the hallway. Usually he greeted her. Simple things. Good morning. Good afternoon. Small acknowledgments. But today he paused near the doorway, then kept walking. No words. At first she thought nothing of it, but as the day went on, that feeling returned, that quiet sense that something had shifted. The kitchen door opened softly, footsteps, measured, careful. Ronan entered the room. His cane tapped once against the floor, then stopped. "You're cooking again," he said. Althea didn't turn right away. Well, she stirred the pan once more. People in this house seemed to enjoy eating. A small pause. Ronan leaned lightly against the counter. "I suppose that's true." She finally glanced toward him. Something about his posture felt different. His shoulders slightly tense, his attention sharper. "You okay?" she asked. Ronan blinked slightly. "Yes." A pause. "Why do you ask?" Althea shrugged lightly. "Just feels like something's on your mind." Ronan exhaled slowly. "Well, work." But the answer came too quickly, too neatly, and Althea noticed. Althea lowered the stove flame, then turned fully toward him. Her eyes studied his face. "You're not a very good liar." Ronan's head tilted slightly. "I didn't realize I was lying. You were—" She wiped her hands slowly on a kitchen towel. "Not about work." A pause. "But about something else." Ronan remained silent. That silence confirmed her suspicion. She leaned back against the counter. "You know something interesting about people?" she said quietly. "What's that?" "You can feel when someone is watching you differently." The words hung between them. Ronan's fingers tightened slightly around the cane. Althea noticed the movement. Her brows narrowed slightly. "You've been studying me lately." Ronan chuckled lightly. "I'm blind, Althea." She nodded slowly. "Right." Another pause followed. Not angry, but thoughtful. Then she said something that shifted the conversation. "You watch people like they're criminals." The sentence landed calmly, but the meaning behind it was sharp. Ronan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he inhaled slowly. Experience teaches that his voice remains steady, controlled. But Althea shook her head gently. Or fear does. Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Ronan straightened slightly. Fear? Yes. Her tone stayed calm, not accusing, just honest. You expect people to betray you. That's not true, isn't it? Ronan's jaw tightened slightly. You don't know anything about my past. No. She nodded. I don't. A pause. But I know how people act when they don't trust anyone. Ronan's voice lowered. You're making assumptions. Well, she shrugged lightly. So are you. That caught him off guard. He frowned slightly. What does that mean? It means you assumed something about me the moment I walked into this house. Ronan stayed quiet. She stepped a little closer. Remember our first conversation? He nodded slowly. You told me I could steal from you. Yes. Her eyes held his. You didn't know me? No, but you expected the worst anyway. Ronan looked down briefly. She wasn't wrong. The kitchen grew quiet again. The food on the stove finished cooking, but neither of them moved toward it. Ronan spoke first. You're right about one thing. Althea waited. I don't trust people easily. She nodded once. I noticed. A pause. Then Ronan continued. Trust isn't something you give away casually. Althea leaned against the counter again. No, another pause. But it also isn't something you choke to death before it even starts. That sentence lingered. Ronan looked toward the sound of her voice. You're very direct. She smiled faintly. Life taught me to be. Another quiet moment passed. Then she added softly, You're not the only one who's been hurt before. Ronan didn't ask for details, but he remembered the conversation on the balcony, the man who betrayed her, the savings she lost, the dignity she chose to keep, and suddenly the argument didn't feel like a fight anymore. It felt like two people protecting scars. Althea turned back toward the stove. Well, she lifted the pan carefully. Dinner's ready. The tension between them didn't disappear. It just shifted. Ronan remained where he stood. You think I'm afraid of people? Althea placed the food onto a plate. She considered that. I think you're careful. A pause. Maybe too careful. Ronan exhaled quietly. And you? What about me? You keep distance from everyone. She smiled faintly. That's called self-respect. Another pause followed. But this one felt different. Less confrontational. More aware. Ronan listened as she moved around the kitchen. The soft clink of plates. The quiet rhythm of her steps. And despite the argument, despite the tension still hanging in the room, he realized something. Althea Rivers wasn't afraid to challenge him. Most people in his life avoided that, but she didn't. And strangely, that honesty made the distance between them feel thinner than before. Not gone. Not yet. But something about this conversation had changed the air between them, and both of them could feel it, even if neither one said it out loud. The house was unusually quiet that afternoon. Not the peaceful quiet that came with the ocean breeze drifting through the windows. This was the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel louder. Althea stood in the hallway outside Ronan's study, holding a stack of folded documents, invoices, maintenance reports, things he usually reviewed at the end of the week. She knocked lightly on the door. Ronan. No answer. She waited a moment, then knocked again. Still, nothing. Well, she pushed the door open slowly. Guess he stepped out. The study smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. Large shelves covered the walls. A heavy desk stood near the window, overlooking the ocean. Althea walked inside and placed the documents on the desk. She began organizing the scattered folders already lying there. Ronan had a habit of stacking papers without finishing them. Millionaire investor, she murmured softly. But still messy. She smiled faintly to herself, then reached toward the edge of the desk. Her elbow accidentally brushed against a small glass sculpture sitting near the corner. The object wobbled, tilted, then slipped. Oh! The sculpture dropped toward the floor. The glass piece never hit the floor. Before Althea could even react, a hand moved quickly through the air, catching it, cleanly, without hesitation, without searching, just catching it. Althea froze. Her eyes lifted slowly. Ronan stood beside the desk, the sculpture resting firmly in his hand, his expression calm, almost too calm. For a moment neither of them spoke. The room felt suddenly very still. Then Althea blinked. Once, twice. Her gaze moved from the sculpture to his hand, then to his face. "You..." Her voice barely came out. Ronan didn't move, didn't speak. Althea's chest tightened. That was falling. A pause. "And you caught it?" Ronan swallowed slowly. "Yes." Her brow furrowed. "You didn't even hesitate." Silence. Her heart began beating faster now, a strange realization creeping into her mind. She stepped back slightly. "Wait." Her voice sharpened. "You didn't search for it." Another pause. "You just grabbed it." Ronan placed the sculpture gently back on the desk, his movements careful now, measured. But it was too late. Althea's eyes widened slowly. "Oh my God." The realization hit her like cold water. She stared at him, not blinking, not breathing. "You can see..." The words came out almost as a whisper. Ronan closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. He didn't answer, and that silence confirmed everything. Althea shook her head slowly. "No." Her voice trembled slightly. "No. No, that's not..." She looked around the room like reality might suddenly change, but it didn't. Her eyes returned to him. "You've been watching me..." The words grew louder, stronger. "How long?" Ronan inhaled slowly. "Althea, how long?" Her voice cracked now. "How long have you been able to see?" He hesitated. "Just long enough." And that hesitation broke something inside her. Her expression hardened. "Oh my God." She laughed once, but it wasn't amusement. It was disbelief. "All this time..." Her voice rose. "All those days I helped you walk through this house. All those times I held your arm." Her breathing grew uneven. "And you could see the whole time..." Ronan stepped forward slightly. "Althea, listen. Don't." Her voice cut through the room sharply. "Don't move." She backed away from him, her eyes burning now. "You lied to me." A pause. "You made me look like a fool." "That's not what I..." "You let me guide you." Her voice cracked again. "Like you were helpless." Ronan's jaw tightened. "I had reasons." "Reasons?" Her laugh came out harsh. "You tested me." He didn't deny it. That silence hurt more than any explanation. "You thought I was a thief." "No, but you acted like it." Another pause, the air between them thick with anger. Then Althea said something quieter, more painful. "And the worst part..." Her voice trembled. "I trusted you." Ronan took a slow breath. "I never meant to hurt you." "Well, you did." Her eyes glistened slightly. "You humiliated me." A long silence followed. Then she whispered something that hit harder than her shouting. "Were you watching me the whole time?" Ronan's expression tightened, and that tiny reaction told her everything. Her voice rose again. "You were... who?" Let's pause right here for a second, because this moment, this was the point where everything almost fell apart. A woman who valued dignity more than anything, discovering the man she trusted had been lying from the very beginning. Think about that. If you were in Althea's position right now, would you forgive him, or would you walk away forever? Seriously, take a moment and think about it. Then tell me in the comments. Because trust, well, trust can break people faster than betrayal sometimes. And what happens next in this story? It's going to test both of them in ways neither expected. The morning after the confrontation felt different. Not explosive, not dramatic, just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles after something important breaks. Althea moved through the Malibu mansion with the same efficiency she always had. Cleaning schedules, groceries, laundry. Everything continued, exactly as before. But something had changed. The warmth in her voice when she spoke to Ronan was gone, replaced by calm professionalism, short answers, careful distance. That morning he stood in the living room while she adjusted a stack of folded towels on the table. Althea, she paused briefly. Yes, Mr. Ashford? The formal title made him flinch slightly. You don't have to call me that. Well, she lifted one shoulder lightly. You don't have to pretend to be blind either. Silence settled between them. Ronan exhaled slowly. You're still angry. I'm still working. Her tone remained even, but the message underneath was clear. She hadn't forgiven him. She had simply chosen not to leave. At least, not yet. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Althea did her job perfectly. Meals prepared on time. The house spotless. Schedules organized. But emotionally, she kept a careful distance. No casual conversations in the kitchen. No relaxed evenings on the balcony. No quiet laughter during dinner. The connection they had slowly built before the truth came out was gone. One evening, Ronan found her arranging flowers in the dining room. Do you hate me now? He asked quietly. Althea didn't look at him right away. She adjusted one last flower in the vase, then spoke. Hate is exhausting. A pause. I just don't trust you. Her honesty landed harder than anger would have. Ronan nodded slowly. I understand. She glanced at him briefly. No, you don't. Another pause. Trust takes time. Then she turned back to the table. And you spent weeks destroying it. Ronan didn't argue after that. He simply changed his behavior. Small things at first. Honest things. He stopped pretending completely. No more cane. No more careful movements designed to fool her. When she entered a room, he acknowledged her directly. No games, no manipulation. One afternoon, she found him repairing a broken cabinet hinge in the kitchen. She stopped in the doorway. You know, maintenance staff handles that. Ronan shrugged lightly. Well, I broke it. She raised an eyebrow. How? I leaned on it. Her lips twitched slightly, almost a smile, but it disappeared quickly. Still, the moment mattered, because Ronan realized something important. Trust wouldn't return through explanations. It would return through consistency, through showing her who he really was, day by day, without deception. A week later, the afternoon sun poured through the tall windows in the living room. Althea stood near the glass, adjusting the long linen curtains. The fabric had twisted along the rail. She stretched slightly on her toes to fix it. Ronan entered the room quietly. Need help? She didn't turn. I've got it. But the curtain rod shifted suddenly. The fabric slipped from her hand. Wait. Ronan stepped forward quickly, his hand reaching up to steady the curtain. Their movements collided. Althea stepped back at the same moment he stepped forward, and suddenly they were close, very close. The curtain fell partially around them, soft fabric brushing against their shoulders. The space between them narrowed to almost nothing. Althea's breath caught slightly. Ronan noticed. So did she. For a moment, neither of them moved. The sunlight filtered softly through the linen fabric surrounding them. Ronan's voice came out quieter now. Sorry. She swallowed slowly. For what? For standing too close. A pause. Althea looked up at him. You're not sorry. The words were soft, but direct. Ronan didn't answer, because she wasn't wrong. The curtain finally slid back into place. The moment ended, but something lingered. Althea stepped away first, adjusting the fabric carefully like nothing unusual had happened. Ronan remained where he stood, watching her, not with suspicion anymore, with something else, something warmer, something complicated. After a moment, she spoke without looking at him. You're trying. Yes. Her hands stilled on the curtain. But trying doesn't erase what happened. I know. A pause. Then Ronan said quietly, but I'm not pretending anymore. Althea finally turned toward him, studying his face. The honesty there felt real, Still, she wasn't ready to forgive him completely. Not yet. But something had shifted again. The distance between them wasn't as solid as before, and both of them could feel it, even if neither of them said it out loud. The Malibu night was calm. The Pacific stretched endlessly beyond the cliffs, dark water moving slowly under the moonlight. From Ronan Ashford's terrace, the ocean looked almost peaceful. Almost. A soft breeze moved across the balcony, brushing against the tall glass doors behind him. Ronan stood near the railing, his hands resting against the cool metal. He had been standing there for a while, long enough for the night air to settle into his lungs, long enough for his thoughts to circle the same question again and again. Footsteps sounded behind him, soft, measured. Althea stepped onto the terrace. She had wrapped a light sweater around herself, the wind gently moving the fabric. "You asked to talk," she said. Her voice was calm, but guarded. Ronan turned slowly. "Yes." A pause followed. The ocean moved quietly below them. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, Althea crossed her arms lightly. "Well, what is it?" Ronan exhaled slowly. The words he had been holding inside for weeks pressed against his chest. "I need to tell you something." She raised an eyebrow slightly. "You've said that before." "I know." Another pause. Then he said quietly, "This time I'm not hiding anything." Ronan looked toward the water for a moment before speaking again. "I stopped pretending weeks before you discovered the truth." Althea's expression tightened slightly. "You mean the blind act?" "Yes." Her voice grew sharper. "And you just kept lying." "I kept pretending," he corrected softly. "That's the same thing." A small silence followed. The wind moved between them. Ronan continued carefully. "I wanted to tell you," she scoffed quietly. "But you didn't." "No." He shook his head slightly. "Because I knew what would happen." Her eyes narrowed. "You thought I'd leave?" "Yes." Althea looked away briefly. The ocean below shimmered under the moonlight. "Well." Her voice came quieter now. "You weren't wrong." Ronan studied her face. The distance between them suddenly felt fragile, like something balanced on the edge of breaking. Ronan hesitated, then continued. "There's something else you deserve to know." Althea's eyes returned to him. "What?" Ronan inhaled slowly. "The day I came home early," her brow furrowed slightly. "The hallway," realization flickered across her face. "You mean?" He nodded. "I saw you." A heavy silence filled the terrace. Althea's breath caught. "You saw—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Ronan's voice softened. "Yes." Her cheeks warmed slightly despite the cool air. "Oh my God." She turned away from him quickly. "That's—" Her voice broke off. Embarrassment, anger, shock, all tangled together. Ronan stepped closer but stopped himself from reaching for her. "That moment stayed with me," he admitted. Her shoulders stiffened. "You should not have been watching. I wasn't supposed to see you." A pause. "But I did." His voice grew quieter. "And it changed something." Althea looked back at him slowly. "What do you mean?" Ronan held her gaze. The attraction was there already. The words settled heavily between them. "But seeing you like that," he shook his head slightly, "made me realize how much I wanted you." Another pause. "And how much I respected you." Althea stared at him. Her emotions moved quickly across her face. Then something softer, but conflicted. Finally she spoke. "Ronan," her voice trembled slightly, "you didn't just test my honesty." She stepped closer. Her eyes locked on his. "You tested my dignity." The words landed heavily. Ronan nodded slowly. "I know. You let me believe you were vulnerable." A pause. "You let me care about you." "I did care about you." Her voice rose slightly, but it wasn't real. It was— Ronan's voice was steady now. "Everything I felt for you was real." The wind moved between them again. Althea looked away toward the ocean. Her chest rose slowly with a deep breath. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "But you still lied." "Yes." A long silence followed. Then Ronan said quietly, I'm sorry. And for the first time since she met him, there was no calculation in his voice. No guarded distance, just regret. Althea leaned against the railing. The ocean moved endlessly below. She stayed quiet for several seconds. Then she said something unexpected. This would be easier if I hated you. Ronan looked at her carefully. But you don't, he said softly. She exhaled. No. A pause. That's the problem. She looked at him again, her eyes honest now. I developed feelings for you. Ronan's chest tightened slightly. But right now, her voice faltered. I don't know what those feelings mean. The wind brushed through her hair. I don't know if what I feel is love. A small pause. Or just loneliness. The honesty of the words hung in the air between them. Ronan didn't interrupt, didn't argue. He simply stood there beside her, looking out over the endless ocean. Because in that moment he understood something important. Althea Rivers wasn't someone who rushed into love. And if he wanted her heart, he would have to earn it honestly. For the first time. Without tests, without deception, without pretending to be someone else. And that realization was only the beginning of what would come next. Morning arrived quietly over the Malibu cliffs. The ocean below moved in slow, steady waves. Sunlight crept across the glass windows of the mansion, filling the long hallways with pale gold light. But inside the house, something felt different. Not loud, not chaotic, just heavy. Althea stood inside her room beside the bed. A suitcase lay open in front of her, half packed. Her movements were slow, careful, almost hesitant. She folded a sweater and placed it neatly inside the suitcase, then paused, her hands resting lightly on the fabric. For a moment she didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at the bag like it held a decision she wasn't ready to face. The conversation from the terrace replayed quietly in her mind. His voice, his confession, the way he admitted everything. Part of her believed him. That was the problem. If she hated him, if the feelings between them had been fake, leaving would have been easy. But they weren't, and that made everything harder. She closed the suitcase slowly. Click. The sound echoed softly in the room. Okay, she whispered to herself. It's time. Ronan walked down the hallway carrying a cup of coffee. He hadn't slept much. The terrace conversation lingered in his mind all night. Her words, her hesitation, the way she admitted she had feelings too. It gave him hope, fragile hope. Then he turned the corner and saw the suitcase. It sat beside the doorway of her room, neatly packed. Ready? Ronan stopped walking. The coffee cup lowered slowly in his hand. For a moment he didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the bag. A quiet feeling settled in his chest, the kind you recognize immediately but still try to deny. Althea stepped into the hallway. She was holding a smaller bag now. Their eyes met. The silence between them stretched for several seconds. Finally, Ronan spoke. Are you leaving? His voice came out lower than he expected. Althea paused. Just 1 second. Then she nodded slightly. Yeah. The word landed softly, but it felt heavy, very heavy. The hallway felt colder suddenly. Ronan set the coffee cup down on the nearby table. You don't have to go. Althea looked at him calmly. Yes, I do. A pause followed. Ronan's voice softened. Because of last night? She shook her head slightly. Because of everything. Another quiet moment passed. Then she spoke again. I need distance. Her tone wasn't angry, just honest. Trust doesn't grow in confusion. The sentence hung between them. Ronan rubbed his hand across his jaw slowly. I told you the truth. Yes, and I meant it. I believe that. Her answer surprised him. Ronan blinked. You believe me? She nodded. That's why this is hard. A pause. But believing someone isn't the same as trusting them again. Ronan's shoulders lowered slightly. The truth in her words left no room for argument. Althea picked up the suitcase. The wheels rolled softly across the floor as she moved toward the staircase. Ronan followed slowly. "Althea." She stopped, but didn't turn immediately. Then she faced him again. "You're not the man I thought you were." The sentence hit him hard. Ronan's chest tightened. For a moment he didn't respond, didn't know how. But then, she added something softer, her voice almost gentle. "You might be better than that." The words surprised him. Ronan stared at her. "You really think that?" She held his gaze. "I think you're capable of being better." A pause. "But right now," she shook her head slightly, "I need space to see things clearly." Althea carried the suitcase down the stairs. Through the living room, toward the front door. Ronan followed quietly behind her. Neither of them spoke again. The front door opened. The ocean breeze rushed into the house. She stepped outside, then turned one last time. Their eyes met across the doorway. Ronan wanted to say something, anything, but the words stayed trapped in his chest. Althea gave him one final look, not angry, not cold, just uncertain. Then she walked toward her car. The suitcase went into the trunk. The engine started, and a few seconds later, the car rolled down the long driveway toward the gate. Ronan stood in the doorway, watching until the vehicle disappeared beyond the iron gates. The house behind him felt enormous again. Quiet, empty. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt lonely. And Ronan Ashford finally understood something he had been avoiding for a long time. Trust wasn't the only thing he had risked losing. He might have lost the one person who actually saw him. Several weeks passed. The Malibu mansion remained exactly the same. Same ocean view. Same tall glass windows overlooking the cliffs. Same quiet halls stretching through the house. But something about the place had changed. Or maybe it was Ronan who had changed. He moved through the kitchen one morning holding a cup of coffee. His steps slowed near the counter. Althea used to organize everything here. Spices arranged neatly. Utensils always placed back exactly where they belonged. Now, things still worked. But the order felt different, not wrong. Just not hers. He opened a cabinet and stared inside. For a moment, he simply stood there, then closed it again. Later that evening, he walked into the dining room. A single vase sat in the center of the table, empty. Althea used to place fresh flowers there every few days. Nothing elaborate, just small arrangements she picked up during grocery trips. Ronan never realized how much he noticed those flowers until they were gone. He reached out and touched the edge of the vase. The house felt bigger now. Too big. That night, he passed through the kitchen again. The room felt strangely quiet, because something else was missing. Music. Althea used to play soft music while cooking, sometimes jazz, sometimes old soul songs. Nothing loud, just enough to make the house feel alive. Now the silence felt heavy. Ronan leaned against the counter slowly, and that was when the realization settled in. A quiet one, but painful. He hadn't fallen for Althea Rivers because she was beautiful. Yes, she was beautiful, but that wasn't the reason. No. He fell for the way she cared for the spaces around her. The quiet kindness in how she moved through the world. The dignity she carried even when life had hurt her. He didn't fall for her beauty. He fell for her heart. And now that heart was gone from the house, leaving behind a silence he couldn't ignore. Oakland felt different too. Familiar, but different. Althea sat at the kitchen table in her mother's house late one evening. The same house she grew up in. The same neighborhood where her cousins still dropped by unexpectedly. Life here moved the way it always had. Church on Sundays. Family dinners. Laughter spilling into the streets during summer evenings. But something inside her felt unsettled. She stirred her tea slowly. She had tried to move forward. Tried to focus on work. On rebuilding her routine. But certain memories kept returning. Ronan standing on the terrace that night. The hesitation in his voice when he admitted the truth. the way his defenses slowly disappeared as they talked. And strangely, she missed their conversations, those quiet talks on the balcony, the arguments in the kitchen, even the tension between them. She sighed softly. Her mother entered the room carrying groceries. "You're thinking about him again?" Althea looked up. "I didn't say anything." Denise chuckled gently. "Baby, you didn't have to." She set the grocery bags on the counter. Althea rested her chin in her hand. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel." Denise leaned against the counter. "Well, that's normal." A pause. Althea looked toward the window. "I miss talking to him." Her mother studied her quietly. And I hate that part of me understands why he did what he did." Denise nodded slowly. "People are complicated." Another pause followed. Then Denise said something that stayed in the air between them. "Baby, sometimes people make mistakes before they learn how to love right." Althea looked down at her tea, thinking, maybe her mother was right. Days passed, but the feeling didn't fade. Althea found herself remembering small moments, the way Ronan stood quietly listening during their conversations, the way he slowly dropped his guarded behavior over time, the vulnerability in his voice during the terrace confession. One evening she sat on the front porch watching the sunset. The sky over Oakland burned softly with orange and purple. Her cousin passed by and waved. "Still visiting Malibu soon?" he joked. She smiled faintly. "No," but even as she said it, something inside her tightened, because a part of her knew something. She wasn't finished with Ronan Ashford. Not yet. And the reason surprised her. It wasn't attraction, not entirely. It was the possibility of who he might become if someone believed in him. The thought lingered. Quiet, persistent, like a door she hadn't fully closed. Later that night, Althea sat with her mother on the porch. The air was warm, crickets humming softly in the distance. Denise glanced at her daughter. "You still thinking about him?" Althea hesitated. Then she said something unexpected. "Mom, I think I knew something before everything happened." Denise raised an eyebrow. "Knew what?" Althea exhaled slowly. "I suspected he could see." A pause. "I noticed little things. How he turned toward sounds too quickly. How he reacted to movement." Denise blinked. "You stayed anyway?" Althea nodded. "I wanted to see if he would tell me the truth himself." But he didn't, and that was the part that hurt the most. Evening settled slowly over the Malibu cliffs. Clouds rolled across the sky, thick and heavy. Rain tapped lightly against the tall windows of the mansion. Inside, the house felt quiet. Too quiet. Ronan stood in the living room, staring out toward the dark ocean. Weeks had passed, but the silence inside the house still carried the absence of someone who had once filled it. He had learned something during those weeks. Loneliness had a sound. It sounded like empty rooms, like music that no longer played in the kitchen, like flowers that never appeared on the dining table. The rain grew stronger outside. A sudden sound broke the quiet, the doorbell. Ronan turned slowly. He frowned slightly. Visitors rarely came unannounced, especially this late. The bell rang again. He walked toward the front door. His hand rested briefly on the handle. For a moment he hesitated. Then he opened it and froze. Rain fell behind her, soft at first, then heavier against the stone driveway. Althea stood on the doorstep, her hair slightly damp, a small overnight bag resting beside her feet. For a moment neither of them spoke, neither of them moved. Ronan's breath caught quietly in his chest. "Hi." The word came out soft, almost uncertain. Althea shifted slightly, brushing rain from her sleeve. Hey." Her voice carried that familiar calm, but there was nervousness beneath it. Ronan stepped back slightly, giving her space. "You're here?" She nodded once. "Yeah." A pause stretched between them. The rain continued falling behind her. Finally, Ronan asked quietly, "Are you coming in?" She hesitated, just for a second, then stepped inside. The door closed behind her, and suddenly the house didn't feel quite so empty anymore. They stood facing each other in the living room, the same place where so many quiet conversations had happened before everything fell apart. Althea placed the small bag beside the door. Her fingers brushed together nervously. Ronan waited. He didn't rush her, didn't interrupt. He simply stood there, listening. Finally, she exhaled slowly. "I didn't come back because everything suddenly feels perfect." He nodded slightly. "I wouldn't expect that." She glanced toward the window briefly, watching rain slide down the glass. "I thought leaving would make things clearer." A pause. "In some ways it did." Ronan stayed silent. She turned back toward him. "I realized something." His shoulders stiffened slightly. "What?" Her voice softened. "I walked away to protect my pride." A quiet breath left her chest. "But I came back." She hesitated. "Because my heart wouldn't stop choosing you." The words hung in the room. Simple, honest, powerful. Ronan didn't move for several seconds, not because he didn't want to, but because the weight of those words settled deep inside him. Ronan stepped closer slowly, carefully, like approaching something fragile, something important. The rain continued tapping softly against the windows behind them. "You came back anyway," he said quietly. Althea nodded. "Yes." He studied her face, looking for hesitation, looking for doubt. But what he saw instead was determination and vulnerability. Ronan took another step forward, closing the distance between them. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice." His voice was low, sincere, not dramatic, just honest. Althea searched his face, looking for the guarded man she first met. But the man standing in front of her now felt different, more open, more real. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt warm. Althea finally smiled. Just a little, but it was the first genuine smile Ronan had seen from her in weeks. "Good," she said softly. "Because I don't forgive twice." Ronan blinked once, then chuckled quietly. "Well, that's fair." She laughed too, a small laugh, but enough to break the tension that had hung between them for so long. Ronan lifted his hand slowly, carefully, the same way he had once reached for her during those quiet moments inside the house. This time, he didn't hesitate. His fingers gently found hers. For a brief second, she didn't move. Then, she squeezed his hand, not loosely, not uncertainly, but firmly. The warmth of that small gesture traveled through both of them, and in that moment, something finally settled. Not perfection, not certainty, but something real, something worth fighting for. Outside, the rain continued falling softly over the Malibu cliffs, but inside the mansion, the silence no longer felt lonely, because Althea Rivers had come back, and this time, Ronan Ashford knew exactly what he had to protect. Several months later, the Malibu mansion felt different, not larger, not quieter, but alive again. Music drifted softly from the kitchen. Old soul music, the kind Althea loved playing while she cooked. Ronan stood in the doorway watching her. She moved through the kitchen with the same calm rhythm she always had, one hand stirring a pot, the other reaching for seasoning. Her hair was tied loosely tonight, curls falling around her shoulders. The late evening light from the windows touched her skin softly. For a moment, Ronan didn't say anything. He just watched and smiled, because the house no longer felt empty. "Are you just going to stand there?" she asked without turning. Ronan chuckled quietly. "Well, I was enjoying the view." She glanced over her shoulder, a playful look in her eyes. "Careful, Mr. Ashford. I told you not to call me that anymore." She lifted an eyebrow. I remember, but sometimes you need reminding who runs this kitchen." Ronan stepped into the room slowly. "Oh, is that how this works?" She placed the spoon down and turned to face him. "You eat here, don't you?" He nodded. "Yes." "Well, that means I'm in charge." Ronan laughed softly. The sound filled the room in a way it hadn't in years. And that was the strange thing about love. Sometimes it didn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it rebuilt itself quietly. Through small moments. Through forgiveness that didn't come easily. Through trust that had to grow again from the ground up. Althea walked past him toward the dining table carrying 2 plates. But as she passed, Ronan gently caught her wrist. Not forcefully. Just enough to pause her. She looked up at him. What? Ronan hesitated slightly. There were still moments when the seriousness of everything they had been through returned. Not as pain, but as awareness. I'm still amazed you came back, he said quietly. Althea studied his face for a moment. You already know why. Yes, but it still surprises me. She set the plates down on the table before turning fully toward him. You want the honest answer? He nodded. Yes. Althea stepped closer. Close enough that the warmth between them became noticeable. Her voice softened. I came back because leaving didn't make the feelings disappear. Ronan's expression grew thoughtful. And now? She exhaled slowly. Now. Her fingers brushed lightly against the front of his shirt. I'm still figuring it out. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Well, that sounds terrifying. She laughed softly. It is. The laughter faded into something quieter. The kind of silence that carried emotion instead of emptiness. Ronan lifted his hand slowly, his fingers brushing gently along her cheek. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into the touch slightly. That simple gesture carried more intimacy than either of them expected. Ronan spoke again, his voice softer now. You changed me. Althea tilted her head slightly. No, I didn't. You did. He shook his head gently. Before you walked into this house, I trusted no one. His thumb traced lightly along her jaw. And now? Althea asked. Ronan looked into her eyes. Now I trust the woman who refused to let me hide from myself. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Althea leaned forward, just slightly, her lips brushing softly against his. The kiss wasn't rushed, not desperate, just warm, intentional, the kind of kiss that came from understanding rather than impulse. Ronan wrapped his arms gently around her waist, pulling her closer. The world outside the house seemed to quiet. The ocean, the wind, even the music from the kitchen faded behind that moment. When the kiss ended, Althea rested her forehead lightly against his chest. Well, she murmured. That was nice. Ronan chuckled quietly. Just nice. She smiled against him. For now, a pause. Then she looked up again. But don't get comfortable. Oh. Remember what I told you. He nodded slowly. You don't forgive twice. Exactly. Ronan smiled. Then I guess I'll spend every day making sure I never need a second chance. She studied him carefully, then nodded once. Good answer. The two of them finally sat down at the table. Dinner waited between them. The music continued playing softly in the background. And for the first time in years, the mansion felt like a home. Not because of the money, not because of the ocean view, but because two people who had once been guarded, wounded, and afraid chose to try again. And sometimes, that's the real lesson about love. It doesn't always arrive perfectly. Sometimes it arrives messy, complicated, wrapped in mistakes and misunderstandings. But if two people are willing to learn, willing to grow, and willing to forgive without losing their dignity, then love has a way of finding its place, even in the most unexpected houses, even between two people who once believed trust was impossible. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes a love story worth telling. Before we end tonight's story, let me ask you something. If you were in Althea's place, would you have walked away forever, or would you have given Ronan a second chance? Go ahead and tell me in the comments. I really want to hear what you think. And if this story touched you in any way, don't forget to like the video. It helps YouTube share the story with more people who might need to hear it. And if you're new here, Suga, welcome to Ms. Wink Stories. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because the next one, it might just surprise you. Good night.